What's this firm, and what exactly have they been doing?
Sure. So DCI Group is a public affairs consulting firm in Washington, not super well known to the rest of the country. But if you look at political campaigns that have been run over the past decade, where the product was actually to make a stock or bond increase in value, we were able to find 6 campaigns like that were really organized just about making a stock or bond pay off. DCI was behind all 6 of them. And usually a hedge fund was a client. They had a big investment in a particular bond or stock, and they used DCI to kind of create this whole campaign of all these other people coming out of the woodwork to advocate for policies that would help that bet pay off.
And the person at the front of this is James Glassman. He's a mover and shaker. We've seen him testify before Congress. He actually served as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs in W's administration. So he's got some credentials behind him.
He's got an incredible resume. Publisher of the New Republic, wrote Dow 36,000 back in 1999. A top American diplomat, has done it all in D.C. And it turns out that at the same time as he was doing a lot of these things, he was working for a series of groups that were affiliated, essentially front groups for this consulting firm DCI, and taking public positions where he was advocating for exactly what the hedge funds wanted at the same time that the hedge funds were hiring DCI.
So this is basically a question, I mean, it's a question of a lot of things, but it's a question of disclosure is a big part of it, right? Are there any rules if someone comes before Congress? Don't they have to say who's paying them?
Sort of, but in this case, for instance, it was never brought up. Nobody asked him about it. He didn't bring it up.
So they have to tell. He only has to tell you if you ask him the right question.
Well, there's a form you have to fill out called Truth and Testimony. He didn't include any of that on there, but I'm sure it's none of the stuff we're talking about here is really. We're talking about law breaking. It's more about these are gray areas. People are speaking out. They're exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech, but you've got to be skeptical sometimes because you don't know if there's no requirement for disclosure. You don't know how money is changing hands behind the scenes without your knowledge.
How is this different from companies lobbying their positions, their cause to congressmen?
That's a great question. I mean, companies do the exact same thing. They'll lobby directly.
Except we have data on it. We have disclosure data.
Right, but companies will also do this. Sometimes we call this astroturfing because it's fake grassroots. Finding allies to speak up on your behalf, sometimes paid. Companies invented this. It's been going around for decades. But hedge funds are a kind of a newer entrant. They've only been doing this, as far as we know, about 10 years. And if you think about it, a hedge fund isn't even invested in a policy for any longer than their stock or bond they own is. They might turn around and go short. And so it raises it to kind of a new level of kind of mercenary activity.
And you saw that as well with some of what James Glassman did. Like he'll advocate for one position and then later on he'll change his mind because presumably the hedge fund that had hired him had a different outcome affiliated with that position. We
write in our Business Week story about he testifies at a hearing that bankruptcy for Puerto Rico would be a great idea. Less than a year later, he writes an op-ed where he says it would be a terrible idea. Now, at the time he was testifying before Congress, DCI was working for a hedge fund that had an interest in something quite different that he said would be terrible to go bankrupt. Then when he turns around, not too long after that, DCI comes out working for hedge funds that would be harmed in a bankruptcy.